So when people ask you, who is Guy Kawasaki, how do you introduce yourself?
I tell people that I wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Because we all look alike. So listen, I was Apple's software evangelist, and then I was Apple's chief evangelist. I've started some tech firms. I've started a venture capital firm. Today, I am the chief evangelist of Canva. I am the host of the Remarkable People podcast, and I also write a few books. I've written about 16 or 17 books, and I am also the biggest fan of AmberMac in anything below the Canadian and US borderline.
I love it. You know, I was looking a little bit into your bio, even though we've known each other for years. I know you started writing books in 1987. I first connected you with you, I think in 2008, 2009. And I do want to say that the Remarkable People podcast, it feels to me like this is the most fun you've ever had. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, as I look back, I think that the Remarkable People podcast is the best work I've ever done. It's also the least appreciated, but God has a sense of humor that way.
Well, let's talk about the podcast in the series, because to me, it feels like actually more than a podcast. I mean, you really are shining the light on these people through emails, through audio, through video. This is based on a book. So it really is kind of an overarching brand. Why did you decide to focus on remarkable people? And hopefully you'll never run out of people to interview.
Well, there's two versions to this story. Okay. So you want to hear the truth or you want to hear the PR spin?
We have enough time to hear both.
Okay. Okay. So the PR spin is that, as I look back on my life, I figured out that, Guy, you have the blessing and the honor of many people knowing of you. They don't necessarily know you, but they know of you because of your work with Macintosh and Canva. And then I have 45 years of experience in Silicon Valley. So it's not like I'm just a NPR journalist and I've only been interviewing people. I've actually been on the front line. I've been, slinging shit. I've been digging ditches. I've been, doing whatever I do. And the third thing is at 70 years old, I just don't give a shit anymore. So I'm willing to ask anything. So I figured that I got those three qualities, and I have a moral obligation to use those three qualities to tap these remarkable people and find out what made them remarkable so that my listeners can also be remarkable. So that's the PR story. Slightly closer to the truth is that when I was writing and releasing my previous book called Wise Guy, I was on the podcast tour as an author, as a guest, not as a host. And I started talking to all these podcasters and I said, so tell me, how does podcasting work? And they said, well, we sell 3 ads. We sell one at the beginning, one at the middle, one at the end. I said, well, how much is the one at the beginning? Oh, 25 grand. How much is the one in the middle? 15 grand. How much is the one at the end? 10 grand. And I'm not exactly Elon Musk or a math major, but I can add up 25, 15, and 10 and get 50. And then I can multiply 50 by 52 and get $2.5 million. So I said to them, you're telling me you make $2.5 million? No, not really, because we have more than 52 episodes. And so after I put my brains back in my head, I said to myself, why are you writing books, Guy? You can do a podcast. You can sell $50,000 worth of ads 52 times a year. None of that has worked out, but it sounded good.
I was going to ask you, how is it working out?
I'm about 2.5 million short.
But you're having fun, right?
I am having fun. And I also seriously believe that, the nature of my podcast is I'm not on a specific subject, right? It's not like I'm only talking about education or music or physics. Every week is different. And one week it's a social psychologist, and next week it's Andrew Zimmern talking about bizarre foods. And next week, it's Christy Yamaguchi talking about figure skating. The next week, it's Margaret Atwood talking about dystopia. The next week, it's a guy who is inventing ways when you lose your control of your limbs because of spinal crack. How do you patch up the spinal cord? So 52 times a year, I have to understand a new subject. So I think it's postponing my dementia.
I thought you were going to say something positive, like it was a learning journey
That
for
is
you.
positive. What do you mean?
I guess
Well,
so. You're right.
postponing your dementia is a very positive thing.
That's
I
true.
mean,
True. That's a fair comment. You're still doing other stuff too, right? You're still. Are you still doing speaking? Are you still surfing? Tell us a little bit about Guy's Day.
well, I mean, I prior to the pandemic, I was going on about 60 to 75 trips a year making speeches. That's how we always used to overlap, right? So literally I made 50 to 75 speeches a year all over the world. And then that all shut down during the pandemic. And I have to say that I just love not traveling. I love not traveling. So right now I probably make 5 in-person speeches a year. 4 of them are in Hawaii because my son is at the University of Hawaii, and one is, I don't know, South by Southwest. I'm going to South by Southwest tomorrow. I very seldom make in-person speeches anymore. And the other thing is violating all HIPAA regulations. About 4 years ago, Amber, I lost almost all my hearing. So I use a cochlear implant now. And a cochlear implant takes you from being deaf to just having really lousy hearing. Okay. But it is a miracle. It is a miracle. Trust me, if you're deaf and you can now hear lousy, it is a miracle. And so one of the problems with lousy hearing is it's very hard to give in-person speeches because, for one thing, you cannot take Q&A. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that. Even with good hearing, if you take Q&A, somebody at the back of the room with a British accent or something, or French accent, is going to go, ho ho, I am from Paris and I saw your Le Macintosh, and like 16 minutes later saying, what is the freaking question, Jean-Louis? And it drives me crazy. But now that I'm deaf, I cannot hear that. And I have a very hard time measuring audience reaction because I cannot hear the applause. And it's tricky.
Absolutely. Just as we're recording this, you were saying you were using the web-based version of Zoom, and you could see transcripts live, which is super cool. So presumably that's what you're doing now.
Yes, but I am hearing you, but that's because you're not saying all the time, right?
Fair.
But if you were from Montreal, it would be a very different story. Ever.
Okay, I wanted to talk. You mentioned South by Southwest. I know you're sitting down with, I believe, the founder or co-founder of Signal.
Meredith Whitaker.
Okay, so Signal is kind of a big, I don't want to call it a priority of yours, but you're falling in love with Signal. For people who don't know what Signal is, tell us a little bit about Signal.
Yes,
and why you have this sort of passion for Signal, especially as of late.
Well, as you might be able to discern, I feel very strongly about democracy, LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights, reproductive rights, voter rights. I feel very strongly about that. And so in this United States, it's getting trickier and trickier. And I think that people need a really secure way to communicate. And I don't mean to be facetious, but Signal is the way. I mean, and part of the proof of that is militaries use Signal, and mafia use Serial, and drug dealers use Signal because they don't want the FBI, hearing their communication. So the beauty of Signal, it is truly encrypted, including the metadata. And a lot of people might say to you, well, Apple's iMessages is encrypted. Yeah, it's encrypted. But if you are backing up to iCloud and you're only the 0.1% of the people who have turned on encryption in iCloud, you may be transmitting encrypted, but your iCloud is not encrypted. They can see everything in iCloud. So I just want people to have a secure way to communicate, because Amber, if I have this horror stories like, what happens if 2 teenage girls are talking about missing their period, and are they pregnant? What are they going to do? And that kind of conversation should not be privy to anybody.
Yeah, especially on social media. And so that really brings me to my next question, because in the early days of social media, you were the guy, literally, who all of us looked up to. You were very prevalent across all the social media platforms, starting with Twitter. I noticed on Twitter when I went there just today that you haven't posted there in a few months. So are you turning your back on social media and preferring some of these private apps like
Well,
Signal?
there's two levels of my shall I say, cooling off with social media. So Twitter/X, I just cannot morally, I cannot morally use that. And I also, for example, I could not drive a Tesla. I would walk before I drove a Tesla, right? And so, so people might ask, well, Guy, why don't you just quit X? Just delete your account. But I don't know what happens, because if I quit and delete my account, next day, can anybody grab at Guy Kawasaki? I think that's true, right? So, I mean, when Barack Obama actually deletes his account and is not afraid of at Barack Obama being, some who knows what Russian person, right? That's when I'll actually delete. And so I am also backing off on using anything from our friends at Meta, which includes Threads, Instagram, and Facebook. I love Instagram, but I just it's just like a moral decision. So right now I primarily use Blue Sky and I use LinkedIn. But I got to tell you, Amber, that I used to really believe in social media, that it could really like move the needle, that if you posted you had a new book or you had a new podcast or you had a new, article and you spread it out, like lots of people would click on the link and read it. But now, between all the algorithms and the noise and all that, it's not clear to me that social media works at all. And so I think, a better alternative path is something like Substack. But with Substack, I have 18,000 subscribers, and I know that they are getting the email. Now, they might not click, but I know they're getting it. There's no algorithm that says you subscribe to Guy on Substack. But depending on our algorithm, you may or may not get a notification that he posted. That's not true with Substack.
So let's pull out a little piece of that. I want to talk about Blue Sky, because I feel similar to you in terms of the social media platforms. I'm present on them, but I'm certainly using them less and less. And I've been actually quite impressed with Blue Sky, especially with the engagement there. It seems to be that people are engaging more than on X, for example. So what is it about Blue Sky that you're liking right now?
It's not owned by a billionaire. I mean, I'm being honest. It's not owned by a tech bro billionaire who's trying to destroy democracy. Um, the unfortunate part of social media, I think, is that good news, bad news. As you get millions and millions of subscribers, pretty soon the bad guys enter, right? So, I mean, when Twitter first started, it was just this wonderful place. And then Google Plus was like that. And Threads was like that, right? Do you remember those early days of Threads? Like, oh my God, Threads is so wonderful. We're going to get off Twitter. And then it got too popular. So now, at some point, Blue Sky might get so popular that it starts all over again. And then are they going to put an algorithm in and all that? But also, Amber, quite frankly, I think I'm over the hill for social media, because I'm pretty active on Blue Sky and I have like 2,500 followers. I can't even get 2,600. I cannot move that last 100. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And so, how many followers do you have on Blue Sky?
I think I have around 6,000 so far, but it was interesting because over the past few weeks, it's really stabilized. Initially, I was getting quite a few followers every day, like in the hundreds, and then it's kind of flattened out a little bit. So I've had sort of a similar experience in terms of it being difficult to get followers. But like you, I do appreciate that it's not owned by one of these big tech billionaires who's trying to destroy democracy. I think that's good news. And not, I don't want to blame you for those guys, but you did start in Silicon Valley. And I feel like, what happened, Guy? Like, how did this all happen? Any insight into that?
I think they weren't breastfed as kids or something. I had, for the life of me, Amber, I do not know what happened. I mean, Silicon Valley, I mean, it wasn't always kumbaya and, we're all sitting around wearing our Birkenstocks and drinking white wine and smoking marijuana. But really, like if you look back at Hewlett and Packard didn't want to become billionaires so that they can run the U.S. government. I mean, if you look at Andy Gore and all that, I mean, the founders of Intel and all, not that everybody was just like, perfect, wonderful people, but man, I do not know what happened, and I cannot explain it. And I have decided, Amber, that I am going to limit my net worth to 999 million. I don't want to take a chance becoming a billionaire and losing my mind. But
well, you might have to sell some more podcasts.
I'm not
ads.
exactly close to that number, so I am not. You don't need to worry.
It is a really challenging time, though. I think we see some of these big tech billionaires. And for me, I followed Elon Musk for many, many years. And I always thought that, he was problematic in terms of his opinions, his attitude. But Mark Zuckerberg, I think, is a little bit of a different story. A few years ago, I think you saw him kind of turn and try to fight for things like fact checking and more moderation. And he showed some remorse for some of the self-harm content, for example, that he was pushing through algorithms to young girls. But then all of a sudden, the past few months, he's just completely changed. I mean, to me, that almost feels more horrific than Elon.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how you explain it. And maybe it started when he went on that electric foil and they were playing Born in the USA. It had a American flag on. I think that was the beginning of the end. But what's interesting, Amber, like knock on wood, maybe in 2028 a Democrat wins, right? So January 2029, there's an inauguration. And I swear to God, Amber, if I look at the pictures of the inauguration and I see Google and Apple and Meta and Tesla sitting behind the Democratic president, I am going to freaking throw up. I am going to throw up. I am going to run to the nearest toilet. I just do not understand that at all. And then, to me, one of the reasons to embrace DEI, of course, is just the social justice aspect of it, but it is also good marketing, right? You're telling the world, I want people of color to be my customer. I want LGBTQ plus people to be my customer. So what does it say when you throw out DEI because of a change of administration? Are you not therefore saying, I don't want Black people, I don't want Hispanic people, I don't want Asian people to buy my product. I don't want gays. I don't want lesbians. I don't want transgenders. I don't want anybody to buy my product. I just want white, old men to buy my product. I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's definitely some short-term thinking. I think we can all see that. One of the things I think about too is the artificial intelligence game that's happening right now and sort of a war among some of these big tech players. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I read in Fast Company that you said, and I'm going to quote this guy, but this is the quote from Fast Company. You said,
I know what's coming.
AI is God.
Yeah.
Let me know what you meant by that. Unpack it a little bit.
I think that AI is the only hope there is for the survival of mankind. I think AI is sentient. I think it is wise. I think we don't know how it works. I think that if you gave me some really tactical choices like, who can start a nuclear war, Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, or Chat GPT, I would put my money on ChatGPT. If you go to ChatGPT and say, should people start a nuclear war, it will give you a better answer than the fascist leaders in the world. Um, and and now I think people have a tendency to say that, we're going to take the worst of AI. Yes, AI makes mistakes. AI hallucinates. AI, has factual errors. And so we cannot trust AI. But my flip side question to you would be, well, are you telling me that humans are perfect? You're telling me that no human makes factual errors, no humans make exaggerations, no humans are prejudiced. But what people do is they compare the worst of AI against the best of humans. And I think we should either go worst against worst or best against best, but not worst against best.
Well, I kind of see, I've been covering technology for almost 2 decades, believe it or not. And I kind of see tech sort of like our food choices, right? There are options out there that are really unhealthy for us. And then there are options out there that are really healthy for us. And so I think that is true of AI as well, right? I use AI day to day. I mean, even on our business, it's saved us an enormous amount of time when we're taking long video clips like we'll do with this video, and we're making short little vertical videos with captions. I mean, that saved us, hours and hours and thousands of dollars in resources. So I use it all the time. But certainly I understand how to make those choices based on the fact that, hey, there's a wide buffet of tech things in front of me, and I'm going to make healthy choices. So that's the critical thinking part, though, but because that feels a little bit like it's missing. And I think some people, and I wrote about this in my newsletter this week, it feels like some people are kind of outsourcing all of their thinking to AI. That's a little problematic, don't you think?
Well, I mean, absolutely that is problematic. But, there's also a large group of people who outsource their thinking to, shall I say, humans with frailties, right? So, I mean, well, I gotta tell you, man, if I had a choice of outsourcing my thinking to AI or some of these leaders, that's kind of a tough choice there. I mean, listen, case in point, if you say, all right, so I'm worried that my baby will have measles or mumps or rubella. Should I ask Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Chat GPT? Let me think about that. Like, yeah, let's ask the expert, the secretary of, Department of Health and Human Services. I mean,
yeah, that's fair. But then when you have something like Grok, which Elon Musk has created, and it has sort of a different approach in terms of that model, it's a little more whimsical, maybe a little more inappropriate. And some of that bias has been built into it. And that's what I mean about using critical thinking, about choosing the tools that you're using, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not all created equal.
Well, and I think the general statement would be that the smarter you are, the more you're going to get out of AI. You gotta know when to push back on it. But I mean, is it any different if you're using? I use AI every day as a research assistant, as a devil's advocate, as an organizer, as a grammar checker. All these things that you probably use it for too. But you gotta know when AI is wrong, just like you got to argue with your copy editor sometimes. Sometimes you have to tell your content editor, you are wrong. That is not how it works, right? So what's the difference? You got to argue with your content editor, your copy editor, or your artificial intelligence editor.
And it's super powerful, I think, for people who, again, are trying to, like both of us, creating content, putting out a lot of content, research, writing, all of those things make it so valuable to us. So I am with you in terms of it being, I don't want to say that AI is God. That feels like a bit too far-fetched for me, but I know where you're going with it.
Well, 20 years from now, people say, God, Guy figured that out really early.
That's what you're betting on. Okay, I want to spend like 10 more minutes with you, but I want to switch from our conversation around technology. And I want to talk about Guy life lessons, because I have interviewed you so many times over the years, and you have these great stories and life lessons. And I love hearing about, your surfing adventures, your hockey adventures. Sometimes people have this mindset of like, oh, I'm too old to start anything new. You certainly don't have that. So give us some guy
No,
advice.
I don't. Well, I tell you, the fountain of the growth mindset in me is Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck is the mother of the growth mindset. And she's a professor at Stanford, which is about an hour away from me. And she's been on my podcast twice. And I read her book Mindset in, I think, the early 2000s. And basically, she says if you have a growth mindset, you are willing to try new things. You believe you can learn new things. You can, acquire new skills. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe you cannot. And when I read that, I said, guy, as they say in the Bible, the scales were removed from my eyes. And I took up hockey at 44. I took up surfing at 60, which is roughly 40 and 55 years too late. I mean, Carol Dweck changed my life. She absolutely changed my life.
Well, it's amazing too, because you're able then to do all those things with your kids, who I think almost all of them are grown up now. Is that fair to say?
Well, they're chronologically grown up.
So they're out of the house? Is that?
Yes, they are out of the house. Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it is amazing, even when I'm looking at you during this interview, and I know people are listening to the audio version of this, but it looks like you are camped out in some type of surf shack with like a beach sign, got all this kind of, good feeling beach stuff behind you. So you aren't this kind of corporate executive that people might sort of think in their minds, like, oh, I bet he's in an office with a stuffy suit on. That's not Guy Kawasaki.
Well, that's why I'm not a billionaire.
Fair. I understand that. Yes, you would have to sell your soul and maybe surf a little bit less for that path forward. So, Guy, what do you see? Sort of, I know you are maybe not speaking as much, sort of in person. You're doing virtual stuff and some in-person events. You're doing the podcast. What do you see as sort of like this next evolution of Guy Kawasaki? Because, like I said, we've been friends for a really long time, and I've always really looked up to you, and you're always really, sort of pushing boundaries here and there. And I believe you wrote a newsletter, maybe it was just today, about, did you use the word misfits? Those are the people who kind of get ahead. So is Guy Kawasaki a misfit?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly I do not. I'm 70. I'm almost 71 years old right now. Most people would be retired. Their idea of exercise would be playing a round of golf, once a month. Most of the day they're watching Fox. I mean, in that sense, I'm a complete and utter misfit. Because of my podcast, I am constantly, as I said, I have to learn 52 new subjects a year. So I have to do a lot of research. And then do you hear that?
I did not hear that. What was it?
That's good, because that is the Goodyear tire shop telling me that my tires are done. It rang through on my computer.
I did not hear a thing. We're good. I was so intensely listening to you, Guy, when you were talking about is Guy a misfit? It's
okay. So to finish that, Guy is a misfit compared to your, typical 70, 71-year-old. But in the article that we wrote today, we're talking about the misfits who have truly changed the world, right? And I don't put myself in a category of Jane Goodall or Steve Wozniak or Steve Jobs. And I would even say, I hate to admit this, but 4 years ago, if you said to me, who is the closest thing to a living Steve Jobs? Guess who I would have said?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. You could make the case that Steve Jobs only did computers and, like personal digital devices. But Elon Musk has done cars, solar travel or space travel. He's done tunnels. He's done chips in people's brains. He's done, Starlink satellite internet access. You could make the case that Elon Musk has done more than Steve Jobs. One of the things that I really wonder about is that if Steve Jobs were alive today, where would he be on the political spectrum?
Interesting
Now
question.
that is a yeah. Now, I just noticed I read an article about Steve Wozniak, and he gave an interview. Well, let's just say there is no doubt where Steve Wozniak is on this political spectrum, and it's not on the Elon Musk side of the spectrum.
Well, I mean, I think that even though you look at it like an Elon Musk and you think of him as someone who has been one of the most incredible innovators of our time, I think it's also fair to say that you can kind of undo progress. And he's in the middle of that somewhat, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, think of see. I mean, I don't understand this. If you there's a lot of like billionaire venture capitalists on that side, right? And I dare you, like, if you are in the venture capital portfolio of some of these people and you sit at a board meeting, we're going to have to do some layoffs to reduce costs. So my plan is I'm going to send an email to every employee in the company, and I'm going to say, you got to write down 5 things that you did last week. And if you don't respond and I don't like your answer, you're laid off. The venture capitalists would say, what the hell are you talking about? That's your idea of how to do cost cutting? Give me my money back. I mean, I don't understand that kind of thinking.
Well, that's what I mean when I say that, I think Elon Musk is sort of past his prime, right? I think he's going into this era. I really do, where all of the incredible things he has done will be undone essentially by all of these horrendous mistakes that he's made, where he's just living in this alternate universe.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of sad in some ways to see this
Yeah.
decline playing out.
In my humble opinion, the 4 or 5 year ago Elon Musk would have gone down in history in the same sentence with Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs. I mean, I think he did that much innovation. But now, how do you think he's going to be remembered? I mean, it's going to be the picture of him with his chainsaw. I mean,
Yeah, now he's a
I
villain.
really don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean it's the unraveling of Elon Musk, and we're going to be talking about this for years and years, and all that other stuff that he's done is kind of going to be in the shadows. It just won't be front and center, and I think that's in some ways, kind of the tragedy of this time when we see someone like him.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk about Elon Musk anymore. I just want to focus back on Guy Kawasaki for my final question with you. So Guy Kawasaki, share the best advice you can with my listeners who are small business owners, who are employees. If you think about your whole life, you're always sort of sharing wisdom for people. What is kind of the best advice you've been given or you can share with me to close out our chat?
Well, so I would tell you, I have several pieces of advice. So first of all, you work backwards from the customer, not forward from what you like to do. So you may like to do, well, let's take a negative example. Let's suppose you're Kodak and it's the 1970s and you like to make film, you like to make paper. You basically define yourself as a chemical company. We've been very successful. We make billions of dollars. So we got to get people to buy chemicals. And then an engineer in Kodak invents digital photography. And guess what? They don't embrace it because it means people will buy less chemicals. So the lesson there is you got to understand what people are getting from you. They don't wake up in the morning saying, I wish I could buy some chemicals on paper. They wake up in the morning saying, I want to preserve my memories, my graduation, my grandson's birth, our trip to Toronto, that when the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup. That ain't going to happen. So no, that memory.
Stop it.
So I think, work backwards. It's not what you like to do. It's what your customer needs. That would be advice number one. Advice number two is never ask people to do something that you yourself would not do. I wonder if Elon Musk would return an email that said, tell me what you did last week, Elon, the 5 things you did. I mean, you're asking people to do something that you would not do, whether it's fill out CAPTCHA. I don't know about you, Amber, but every time I encounter CAPTCHA and there's like 16 pictures and you have to pick out the pictures where there's a bus in it, I have never, ever, ever got that right the first time. So why would you make your customers do that? You can't do that either. And I think the third thing is instead of just reading about customers or looking at executive summaries, at the very least, go and see the customer, what they're doing. And even better, go and be the customer. And I'll give you a very good example of being the customer. So my friend Martin Lindstrom, he had a Italian pharmaceutical company ask him to help us get, quote, closer to the customer. And so what he did is he took all of their executives, put them in a room, and he made them breathe through straws for about 10 minutes, which is not a comfortable thing. And at the end of that, he said, listen, you want to get closer to the customer? I just made you into the customer. You're a pharmaceutical company. That's what it's like to have asthma. That's what it's like to have asthma.
For people who want to listen to more things from Guy Kawasaki, read more things from Guy Kawasaki, where is the best place for them to go?
Well, if you really, really want to see my best work, it's Remarkable People. It's remarkablepeople.com. And that's my weekly podcast. And you can see me struggle to understand 52 new concepts a year there. It truly is my best work. And you know what I tell you what I find the most exciting part of doing a podcast interview. It's when the guest says, Guy, that is a really good question. No one has ever asked me that before. That's what I live for. I mean, if I can't get 50,000 for the episode, at least if the guest says, Guy, that's a really great question. No one has ever asked me that before. And I know the people on my podcast, they have done hundreds and hundreds of interviews with NPR, MSNBC, Fox, God help them, probably even AmberMac.
Maybe.
I want to know that I asked them something that no one has ever asked them before.
Well, it seems like you just set me up for a challenge for the future, because in this whole interview, you never said that was a really good question.
My next guest is going to say, you know what? My next guest is going to say, Amber asked me that already. Do I have to go over that again? That would be the great praise for you, Amber. And Amber, can I slather you with a little bit more praise?
Sure, bring it on. Because Canadians are feeling bad right now.
Amber, I know a lot of quote unquote influencers, okay? But what I admire about you is that you take a stand. And I don't mean just a stand that, you hated what's the name of that stupid AI clip that just died?
Oh, Humane. Is it Humane?
Yeah. It's not like you just take a stand against Humane, that it's a stupid idea, but you take stands that are political, that I bet you're getting a lot of hateful comments like, why are you Canadian blonde woman telling our president what to do? And you must be taking a lot of heat for this. I admire the fact that you are taking a stand, because a lot of social media swaggering influencers, all they care about is how can you optimize your Instagram post, and that kind of stuff. So that's what I admire most about you.
Well, I am banned in Russia, so that's a badge of honor.
Yeah, okay. How did that happen?
Well, I would say it's really unclear, but a couple of years ago now, the Russian government banned approximately, I think, 1,200 Canadians. Somehow I made it to that list. Margaret Atwood's on the list. There's lots of politicians on that list. I'm not sure how I landed there. But I remember telling my father, who passed away a few months ago, but I told him, and he was so proud of me, probably more proud than many of the things I accomplished in my career. So I'm doing something right.
Wow. But they didn't do that for Americans.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there is such a list in the US, but Guy, I think you would be on it if there were.
I would say that's an honor, Amber.
I
Yeah,
think
you should
so.
be. You should put that in your LinkedIn profile.
I really
In
should.
that little description, banned in Russia.
I should. Well, Guy, just as we wrap up, I should say thank you for the kind words. But I want to kind of throw it back at you because early in my career, when I was watching you on social media, you never shied away from taking a stand. And I saw you do that and continue to get speaking gigs. So I thought, if Guy can do this, there's a chance for me too.
That's a very funny thing because a lot of people who push back on me said, "Guy, you're antagonizing 50% of your potential market," and I would respond, "Those people are not in my potential market. They're not going to hire me. What the, I'm pissing off the NRA. They're not going to hire me. I don't think so. I would have never gone to the NRA convention anyway. So don't worry about it." So your listeners should not assume there is perfect information, and it's better to make some people really happy than not piss off everybody.
Well, that's a good way to wrap this up because I think that is wise advice from you. Guy, thank you so much for joining me once again. I love our interview chats, and thanks for being such an amazing human being.